All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to the first officially named episode of Guiding Your Game, or GG. Um, I mentioned before, D&D did a deep dive. To me, tends to be fairly player focused, and that's on purpose. Most of like D&D YouTube is focused on GMs, and I don't tend to see a ton of player focused content beyond like optimized builds type things. I try to have D&D deep dive focus mostly on player focused things. However, I am a forever GM. I have spent significantly more time behind the GM screen than I have actually playing. Every so often, I do have opinions on dungeon mastering and game mastering style things. I wanted to have a series where I get to talk about that stuff that's not going to kind of be lumped into the D&D deep dive, despite the fact that this is kind of a deep dive about a D&D related to the topic. So GG just seemed to make the most sense. This is not going to be like a regular series like D&D deep dive where I put out, 2 episodes every week or anything like that. This is going to be whenever I have a topic that I think deserves mentioning. That being said, I came to a realization recently. World of Warcraft was not my first MMO, but it was the first one that I fell hard into. The first MMO I ever played, depending on your definition of MMO, the first one I ever played was actually EverQuest. And I did not get very far. I had a friend convince me to share my account with them, and they played significantly more often than I did. I think I started a ranger and I got them up to like level 10, which at that point was like 40 or 50 levels below level cap. I barely played it. My friend maxed out their character in a couple of months. So on my account, which annoyed the hell out of me. And there were quite a few times where I tried to play and I couldn't because they were on my account. Anyway, World of Warcraft, on the other hand, I watched the Make Love Not Warcraft episode of South Park, and at the end of it, there was a code for like a free. It's like either a 7 or a 14-day trial of World of Warcraft. This is back in Vanilla WoW. And so I tried it and I got hooked. I really, really loved it. I played religiously all the way through most of Cataclysm, which is the 4th Ixis expansion. And then I stopped playing because Cataclysm just wasn't that fun for me, and I was getting burnt out, and I was starting to look into other RPGs. I was starting to do, I think, SWTOR had started coming out around then. I'd started dabbling a little bit in D&D Online, and I was branching out into different RPGs. I came back to it recently because Shadowlands, the most recent expansion, is done. And by that I mean they released the final patch, and something I've learned recently is playing a lot of WoW expansions at launch is not very fun because they time gate so much of the stuff that you can do, and they remove almost all the time gates once they release the final patch, or a little while after they release the final patch for an expansion. And then it's really fun because you can play as much as you want, and you don't have to log in every single day. You can have one day where you spend 4 to 6 hours doing stuff, and then not play for a few days and not feel like you've just set yourself back significantly. So anyway, I started playing again, and I came to a realization that relates really heavily to D&D and RPGs in general, which is World of Warcraft reminds me of playing with a poor dungeon master. And by poor, I mean just, I don't want to say a bad dungeon master, because bad is moral based, poor is performance based. And by poor dungeon master, I specifically mean someone that has written their own story and wants to tell this story while the players are just there to be kind of set pieces of the DM's story. And by my definition, that is a poor dungeon mastering choice or game mastering choice, because a dungeon master, unlike what a lot of people think a dungeon master is, like I've seen a lot of people say, well, the dungeon master is God. No, they're not. Well, the dungeon master writes the story. No, they don't. The dungeon master creates a world for the players to tell their story in. And they create situations that allow the players to tell their story. The players are the ones that should be important. However, for a lot of new and poor dungeon masters, they will write a story and find ways to let the players interact with their story instead of creating a world and allowing the world to interact with the players as a story. And that's what I see in World of Warcraft, specifically in comparison to Final Fantasy XIV, which is the main MMO that I play now. Now, I'm not saying that you should base your dungeon mastering on how MMORPGs are run. They are two incredibly different mediums, and the fact that World of Warcraft, until recently, was by far the most popular MMORPG, and they've been doing this poor dungeon mastering and poor game mastering for years and years and years, going all the way back to even the Burning Crusade. You could see it, which was the second expansion for it. So this is I don't have a ton of references to Vanilla WoW, the no expansions, just because I don't know it quite as well as Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King and going forward, because I got really into it around Burning Crusade. I was a very casual player during Vanilla WoW. And I started just before Burning Crusade. I think Burning Crusade came out like 6 months or something like that after I started playing, maybe even not that long. But anyway, let's put it this way. I did not have a character high enough level to do the Burning Crusade content when it came out. I had to level up to get there. Anyway, so I'm not saying you need to base your dungeon mastering on how video games work, because tabletop RPGs are not video games, and that is one of their best selling points in my personal opinion. However, this is a perfect example of something that bleeds into both, which is narrative design and how things work. To give you some examples, so the basic plot of World of Warcraft versus Final Fantasy XIV, both of them start in a very similar place that your standard tabletop RPG adventure is going to start as. You are a generic class that is just starting their adventuring career. In World of Warcraft, you pick your race, and that will actually pick your starting zone. And you will start off by just learning a little bit about your race, and then either the Alliance or the Horde, the larger conglomeration of groups that you're a part of, and you slowly start becoming more important to the plot. Your first few quests, like my personal favorite starting zone is the Night Elves as a starting zone. And the first thing that you do is they go, hey, welcome to being a Night Elf. We're like super naturey, and look, we live in a giant tree. Isn't that awesome? You see those little tigers over there, we want you to kill a bunch for us because there's too many of them and they keep respawning, and we just think it's a good idea for you to practice using your combat abilities. And that's what you do. And then you slowly start tackling more important things, but until you start getting towards the end game content, you are literally a nobody. Nobody cares who you are. The triumphs that you have are really minor. You save little settlements from small problems. But as you start getting into higher and higher stuff, eventually you do things like you fight Kel'Thuzad, who is one of the most dangerous liches in lore at that point, and they're trying to take over the world. Kel'Thuzad was a major part of Warcraft 3. Their resurrection was a huge part of one of the storylines is in there. And the whole goal of the final patch of Vanilla WoW is to stop Kel'Thuzad. And you literally storm his necropolis. You storm his flying base and you kill him because he's going to end the world. Final Fantasy XIV, kind of similar, but right from the beginning, you are shown to be special. This is your story. You're not generic person that eventually might get involved in something important, mostly but by accident. You are chosen by Hydaelyn, who is the world, effectively. You are chosen, you are given a special power. You are not the only person in existence that has this power. You very quickly meet Minfilia, who also has this power. But you are shown to have better control over it, and you are instantly involved in very important things. Your first introduction to the character, you are starting to meet other big players, and they are all kind of deferring to you and your judgment. And as the adventure goes on, when you start getting to the endgame content of A Realm Reborn, which was technically it was the second version of Final Fantasy XIV, because the first version sucked super hard and they rebooted the whole thing. But when you get to the end of A Realm Reborn content, before you get into the in-between stuff, you have literally saved the world, very similarly to how you do in World of Warcraft, but it is you personally that did it. You are referred to by name. You are the Warrior of Light. Everybody knows you. When you walk through certain places, every so often there will be little things that will go, hey, it's the Warrior of Light. And when you meet new players, you will introduce yourself as the Warrior of Light. And you specifically are the person that gets the final blow on Ultima Weapon. You are the person that gets the final blow on La Habrea. And as World of Warcraft goes forward, we get to something like the Burning Crusade, the big final boss of one of the first big raids, and the guy that shows up on the cover of the expansion, Illidan. When you go to fight him, he takes you out near the end of the fight. He stuns the entire raid group. And for the life of me, I can't remember the character's name right now. I think it's Maeve. This is a night elf that had been guarding him in his imprisonment for years and years and years. She comes forward and she actually has to intervene in order for you to be able to kill him. Fast forward to Wrath of the Lich King. You don't even kill the Lich King in the final patch. What happens is when you get the Lich King down to the final, down to the point where he would actually die, he freezes the entire raid party. And that's, at that point, raiding was 25 people. You had 10-person raids and 25-person raids at that point. Old school raiding was 40, and that was nuts. You could have up to 25 people that the Lich King just out of nowhere just goes, yeah, I was never in any danger. Y'all were never going to hurt me. Ever. Like, it is laughable that you guys thought you were going to do anything to me. You weren't. You never were. You're never going to. And Tyrion Fordring has to come in and shatter Frostmourne, his super awesome sword that sucks the souls out of people. And then you get this cool cutscene where you don't kill him. Again, Tyrion's the one that actually kills him, and breaking Frostmourne is what actually kills him. You are ancillary to the whole process. And you see this over and over and over again in World of Warcraft. We go to Cataclysm, fighting Deathwing the Destroyer. That was the whole point of Cataclysm. He burst out of the ground and broke Azeroth. You don't kill him. Thrall does with the Dragon Soul. I didn't play Mist of Pandaria. I don't know most of the plot. I recently leveled a character through Mist of Pandaria, and because of the leveling process now, I didn't get to the end of Mist of Pandaria. I didn't get close to the end of Mist of Pandaria before they shot me into Shadowlands. Warlords of Draenor is another one I didn't play super well. But we go to Legion, and again, over and over and over. Like Legion, the end of the Legion, you fight Sargeras, the Mad Titan. He is literally the big bad of big bad. He is the entire reason all of Warcraft series happened, was Sargeras, because he corrupted corrupted, I can't remember he corrupted the Eridar, who eventually, and he formed the Burning Legion, and the Burning Legion is who corrupted the Orcs, and convinced Medivh to create the Dark Portal, which brought the Orcs in, which the original Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, was all about Medivh bringing the Orcs in, and having to deal with the aftermath. Like, the entirety of the World of Warcraft storyline started because of Sargeras, the Mad Titan. You actually get to fight him, and you don't kill him. Again, you are ancillary to the entire process. The rest of the Titans jail his ass. But you don't. You fight him, but in the end, someone else has to take the killing blow. And this happens over and over and over and over and over again. Compare this to Final Fantasy, where, again, we go to Heavensward, the first expansion. When you fight the Knights of the Round, this is the entire group that has been basically keeping the Dragonsong War going for all eon, for years and years and years and years and years. And have been perpetually keeping this kingdom in war, sacrificing people to die over and over and over again for like 100 years, I think, at that point. You, the Warrior of Light, are the person that takes them out personally. If we go back to the raid series, the Bahamut raid series in A Realm Reborn, you actually take out Bahamut. Bahamut is the reason that the whole A Realm Reborn thing happened, and you don't get sidetracked when Louis Soir comes in and takes him out for you. No, you actually to take him out. And you see this over and over and over again in Final Fantasy XIV. You are the main character of the story. And when things happen, like, they do have other really, really well-known characters in there, but they're always part of what you are doing. They're side characters in your story. You're not a side character in their story. In World of Warcraft, Malfurion and Tyrande and Sylvanas, those are the main characters. Thrall, Anduin now, Varian before that. Those are the characters that actually do things. They're the ones that actually get to kill bosses. They're the ones, Tyrion, they're the ones that actually matter to the story. You just help them look cool. And when you relate this back to RPGs, this is something that I have seen a lot. And I myself have run into issues like that, where I will have a story that I want to tell, and the players get to interact with the story, but the story is more important than the players, and that can't be why that can't be how you run your games, because what will inevitably happen is the players will get tired of being secondary characters in their own story. You know, it's not fun to be the side characters in your own story. And if you start looking at some of the criticisms of WoW, and this is going back for years, but now it's starting to come to the light. One of the big criticisms is, well, why aren't we allowed to be the hero? Like, I remember when the Lich King raid was first beaten, people were really, really upset that at the end of the raid, Tyrion has to come in and save your ass because you can't do it on your own. Like, that was really, really upsetting for a number of people. Like, but I wanted to kill the little Lich King. He's a super bad guy. We literally spent an entire expansion dealing with this dickwad. And he interacts. It's one of the best things about Wrath of the Lich King is when you land on Northrend, depending on which side you go on, one of the quests in the first zone, you go face to face with the Lich King, and he goes, "Ha, you're puny, you're stupid, I have no reason to be afraid of you." And he just tells you off. And so you spend this entire expansion getting more powerful, getting cool gear, fighting everything from old gods all the way up through a tournament that is party crashed by giant undead beetles, going all the way to the point where you fight your way up Icecrown Citadel, this giant tower, the seat of the Lich King's power, only to get to the top and be basically proven like, yeah, you are pointless. No, the really powerful people is Tyrion. The rest of you don't matter. And I've seen that in RPG games where the DM will have NPCs that they create, and those are the people that really do the moving and the shaking. The players do most of the work, but when the big things come, you have to have your ass saved by an NPC. And I've seen this happen a number of ways. You know, something like a forced quote unquote TPK where you are put in front of an enemy that is just far too powerful, and you're saved by some NPC. Or you get to the final battle, and whatever you're doing. I've literally seen instances where the Icecrown Citadel thing happens, where as soon as the boss is taken to 0 hit points, he does this super powerful room clearing ability. The whole party is down, and then one of the DM's characters comes in and actually finishes it off. And then they'll backpedal. It's like, well, I couldn't have done it without you. But at that point, the damage is already done. And I think it's a really, really difficult lesson for a lot of new GMs to learn is when you are GMing, despite the fact that GMs will put significantly more time and effort into an RPG than any player will ever. Even the best, most prepared player that you've ever played with does not put as much work and effort in as even a mediocre GM will, because the player is only working on a single character, maybe a few others if they have a really, really in-depth backstory that they constantly update and things like that, compared to the GM who has to build a world, who has to build every single NPC in the world. So it seems a little bit lopsided that the GM creates this world, but it's not their story. It is the player's story, the people that are putting in quote-unquote less work. And as much as that kind of feels wrong, it's not when you understand the role of the game master, the dungeon master, the narrator, the storyteller, whatever you want to call them. Their job is to create a world that allows the players to tell their own story. And watching the players tell their own story and creating situations that allow the players to tell more interesting and more unique stories is so much more fun than just writing your own story and having people interact with it every so often. One of the things I see every so often in regards to GMs who basically railroad campaigns is like, if you wanted to tell your own story, write a book. That is a really, really reductive argument, but there's a tiny bit of truth in it. If that is your goal, you want to tell a very specific story, then yes, writing a book is a significantly better way to do that. And I've actually got a couple different friends that are authors, one of which is published, and I have her book right there, and it is phenomenal. I have her sequel is still next to my bed so I can finish reading it. Writing a book is a monumental journey. And it is, as far as I can tell, again, I have not written my own book, but as far as I can tell, it is a very rewarding journey when you finally get it out there. And just because you are writing the book does not mean that other people cannot help inspire you or things like that. Things that would be very similar to what would happen in a D&D game, though slightly less so. So if you want to tell your own story, there are mediums to do that. You can do novel writing. You can write for video games and the things like that, which are built a lot more around the writer telling their story and the player getting to interact with it. Those mediums are created for that. You can go into screenwriting, both for television and for film. Those allow you to write the stories that you want, and especially when you get into screenwriting, the fact that you're working with actors and actors are going to bring their own interpretations, that is a very, very good way to tell the story that you want to tell, but get input from other voices as part of that process. If that is what your goal is, tabletop RPGs are not the best medium for that. However, creating a world and allowing players to tell their own stories in it is such a rewarding thing that a lot of beginner GMs are very worried about. And there's an apprehension behind that. The idea of, I've created this thing and I don't want to see people ruin it. I understand that, and I agree with it to a point. But the entire reason you built this world was for adventurers to interact with it. And if bad things happen to the world, as blunt as it sounds, that's a good thing. Bad things, tension, grief, things like that propel the story forward and force change. And stories, by definition, are all about changes that happen. If everything is kept in homeostasis and nothing bad ever happens, there is no change. And it's not a story. It is just a finite point in time. Nobody wants to read about the day nothing happened, unless we're talking about absurdist writing or, theater of the absurd, which is all about the day nothing happened. But the entire point of it is about the absurdity of existence. So the fact that nothing happened is intrinsic to the idea that they're trying to talk about. Really, if you've never studied theater of the absurd, you should. It's really interesting stuff. Waiting for Godot is a brilliant show. But if you read about it, it sounds like the most pointless, boring thing ever. Anyway, so going back to this, creating a world and allowing players to interact with it is amazing. They will see things that you didn't. The stories that they tell are going to be stories that you never could have told in your world. And the stories that they tell could have never been told without a world to be a part of. Tabletop RPGs are a collaborative process. The players and the GM have to work together for it to work well. If either side takes too much of the reins, it's no longer an enjoyable thing. If it goes on the other side, and the players are specifically doing everything they can to fight the GM to make sure that nothing the GM plans ever comes off, that very adversarial relationship that isn't talked about quite as much as the adversarial GM relationship is, you will again get the same problems. And they have a one sentence solution to that as well. It's like, if you just want a power fantasy, go play a video game. Because you can do that in video games. Using cheats and other things like that, you can just mow over everything, ignore everything you want, and feel like the super powerful person that you are. It's still an incredibly reductive argument that doesn't really address the root of the problem. There's just that little bit of truth in it that makes people keep repeating it. The most fulfilling experiences in tabletop RPGs you're going to have is when both the players and the GMs agree to work together. Neither side has a monopoly on what gets to happen. The GM creates the world and the situations. The players tell the story. Now, that doesn't mean that the players always get to choose the outcome of everything. It is the player's story, but the GM is presenting obstacles and things like that. And as I said before, bad things create change. Change is what storytelling is about. So every so often, what the players want, they shouldn't get. Every so often, they should be presented with things that they didn't want to happen. That's one of the reasons we use dice, because it feels very malicious if the GM is the final arbiter that says when good things and bad things happen to the players, because then it becomes an idea of begging the GM for good things and getting punished by the GM for bad things, and that's not good storytelling either. That's why we use these dice. Adding that little bit of chance in there removes the malicious intent that people will just assume when bad things happen. People don't assume malicious intent when bad things happen to the characters of their favorite books. They go, oh, I can't wait to see how this is resolved. But when you have GMs and players, if the GM imposes something bad on the players, it's automatically, well, obviously the GM is trying to punish them. And that's not what it should be. Again, it should be this collaborative process. So bring this back to the original topic of this. Again, a lesson you can learn from MMOs, from the two biggest MMOs on the market right now, is don't be a WoW GM. Be a Final Fantasy XIV GM. And by that, I mean a WoW GM is telling their own stories that the players get to participate in. A Final Fantasy XIV GM is creating a world that the players get to tell their story in, and creating obstacles and struggles for them to overcome in order to tell a more complete story. That's what this whole thing boils down to. And I thought, again, especially looking at the things that have happened most recently, the cinematic that plays after you fight Anduin in the Sepulchre was the one that really got me to think about this. Was just the idea that I've seen this so often in RPG horror stories, at tables. I've heard from friends and things like that, and even with new GMs that I have worked with, is this idea of, well, I have to tell this story. This is the story that I want to tell. No, don't do that. My games that I run, I have a storyline that I create. I've talked about my process a couple of times. Basically, I create an overarching plot for a campaign. And that is done specifically so the world actually exists outside the characters. In order for the characters to really get immersed in the world, it needs to be a real living, breathing world that no matter what the characters do, the world will continue on. If the world only exists when the players are looking at it, it becomes very two-dimensional, and the players aren't going to be in it. So I do write an overarching story plot, but a beautiful example of that changing. The campaign, The Legend of the Three Kingdoms. I actually have the entire campaign here on this channel if you want to watch it. I think we've done 80 episodes over like 4.5, 5 years now. We've been going for a little while. That campaign literally started with the idea of the video game Rift. It was an MMO that I got into while I was starting to shop other MMOs that weren't WoW. He was supposed to be a WoW killer. It wasn't. But it had some cool ideas. But one of the aspects of it were every so often when you were going around adventuring, this rift from one of the elemental planes would just open up, and everybody in that particular area of the world would have to come together to try and close this rift. So every so often, like, a crack would form in the sky, and this huge pillar of fire would come out, and all these fire creatures would just start invading. And it was a really cool idea. And so I created this campaign to kind of come up with a way that I could create a part of my custom world. Mendacia is what the world is called. I wanted a part of my world where every so often there would be these kind of random encounters where one of the elemental planes, or just one of the different planes of existence, would accidentally kind of break into the prime material plane, and whoever was around at the time would have to deal with it. I thought that was a really cool idea. And so the first adventure that the players do after they all get together is they're investigating this place where the fire elemental plane is just kind of breaking through in this town, and they have to deal with that. Very, very quickly, the plot changed drastically due to the backstories of a few of the characters. One of the characters was a Pact of the Undying warlock. I created, he wanted, because one of the three countries that are on this continent called Triregnum, one of the three countries is run by vampires. He wanted to see if he could have a vampire pack master. We created an outcast vampire that was trying to use this character as a way to kind of get back into power. And that was just part of his backstory. And it turned into kind of the through plot that the rest of the characters started dealing with. Because I started noticing, despite the fact that everyone wrote their backstories individually with me, nobody really wrote their backstories together. I started finding these interconnecting points, and I started linking backstories together by adding an NPC here or an NPC there that would have ties to two different players, but backstories. And eventually, we got to the point where the pact master of this player, that was just kind of a way for him to justify being a Pact of the Undying warlock, became the big baddie of the campaign. None of this was planned from the beginning. Again, the whole point of this campaign was to create Rift, an area where random elemental incursions could happen. And now we have a big baddie called the Dark Lord, who they found out throughout the campaign had been working on experimenting with blood magic, and they eventually found out the reason he was doing that is he wanted to create his own world where he was in power, and he succeeded. And now the players are in that world, a demi-plane of dread called Crucitalia, and they're slowly starting to fight back and win, while also getting to deal with aspects of their backstory. And it has been amazing to see just the really interesting stories that have been told that I never would have been able to tell on my own. Like one of the players is currently dealing with the fact that as their character, as a young girl, was kind of forced into an arranged marriage, was able to leave it and had to leave their entire family behind because the person that they were arranged to marry was a vampire as part of the ruling class. You're not allowed to say no. And so she is now finally kind of coming to the terms with the things that she did in her youth, to become a vigilante and starting to realize the other aspects of vigilantism, and is now finally getting to the point where she's getting the chance to reconnect with people from her past that she had written off. None of this is stuff that I would have ever written myself. And seeing the players react to it and getting their input on it has been absolutely fascinating. And there's no way I could have told this story on my own. Again, the story I wanted to tell was about riffs. The story that we are telling is about the ideas of suffering, the ideas of overcoming bad things in your life, and how negative events in your life can change you, but they can change you for the better. None of this stuff was in my original storyline. Had we just done the story that I wanted it to tell, probably the campaign would be over by now. And it wouldn't have been as interesting. And that is just one character. We have a bunch of other characters and a few people that have dropped out that their characters still exist in the game because they don't want to leave them on the cliffhanger that they did. And we're going to resolve those plot lines, whether those players can play with us or not, because it's their story. And I want them to be able to finish telling it and have it come out. But adding that little bit of chance from the dice, and adding, the other things that happen when other players are interacting with this stuff, has made for some of the most interesting storytelling I've ever seen. So yes, it is very, very important to make sure your tabletop RPGs are collaborative. Create the most interesting, fascinating world you want. Or create a sandbox that gets written as the players experience it. However you GM, that is entirely your prerogative. But if you really want to be a good GM, you create the world, the players tell their story, and the collaboration of the world and the story that the players want to tell becomes the campaign. And it is incredibly rewarding. It is incredibly fun. And I think, again, don't take lessons from your RPGs from MMO. This is just an example to exemplify this idea. Your characters should feel like the Warrior of Light. They should feel that they are important. They don't need to be the most important person right from the beginning. Let them be generic at first. But by the time the campaign gets going, they should be well known. They should feel important. They should feel like the main character. Don't let your characters be like WoW characters where, yeah, they do important things, but they're not really important. Nobody knows their name. Nobody really cares about them. Every expansion, they're reduced to, okay, generic person, why do I care about you? Don't let them be a side character in their own story. Let them be the main character, and you design everything around them to help them tell their story. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your favorite main character moment you have ever experienced in a tabletop RPG. It could be just a one-off of dialogue where you got to say something really cool and do something cool. It could be the culmination of a campaign. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, I hope you guys found this insightful. Please use this to guide your gaming. And remember, GG. Bye-bye.